Hello, and thank you for stopping by Britain's Hidden History. If you are interested in finding out the version of British history that used to be taught in the schools, that used to be widely accepted, and is known as the authentic history of Britain, then you have come to the right place. Were the Britons descended from Troy? When did the Trojan Wars happen? Are the lost tribes of Israel alive and well and living in Wales? Is it possible to read hieroglyphics using Welsh, using Cymroglyphics? The birth of Western Christianity, did that take place in Britain? Was the Trojan War in Cambridge? The myth of a Roman invasion, and of course, the stories of King Arthur, the historical King Arthur, and there's two of them. We look at the works of Wilson and Blackett, people like Fomenko, Velikovsky, all these different sources, Clemens Beaumont, Anthony Thom, looking at the ancient history of Britain, how the star mounds, how things are laid out by astrological terms, all the way back to ancient Assyria, right up until about the 7th, 8th century, well, up until Norman times, really. And we can even look a bit at the myth of that. So, if this sounds like the sort of thing you're interested in, please join in. Join this rapidly growing community. There are so many people out there researching, coming back with amazing finds, both from the books and from the places. So, Thursday evening, 8 o'clock UK time, there's a show every week, includes interviews with people out there finding things, loads of fun and games. It's a nice light-hearted channel, so please keep it family friendly, be polite to each other. And then most days of the week, almost every day now, there's a video up, a little bite-sized chunk of history for you to think about and the evidence that goes with it. So please welcome aboard, be active, join the chat groups, join the Facebook groups, do the whole thing, get involved, use your grey matter and find out what is going on with this Britain's hidden history.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another of Britain's Hidden History's live shows. So let me start then by giving an update as to Alan's condition. 2 days ago, Angie announced that Alan had been taken to hospital with a serious health concern. The family say, "We are so grateful for all the love and support we have received during this difficult time. Alan is physically progressing well, and we are hopeful that he will continue to improve. We would like to thank everyone for their prayers and well wishes. Alan is strong and determined, and we know that he will get through this. We appreciate your continued support and ask that you please keep Alan in your thoughts and prayers." And Angie would like to add, "We are all praying for Alan's speedy recovery. Please join us in sending him your love and support. Thank you." I know we've all been very concerned, but for his age, he's doing really well. So today we have Arnie playing a new violin piece, and also in the music corner we have the daughter of a Britain Hidden History member playing the piano as background to David Parker's photo montage from Ponty to Treforest and back. And later B. Parker will be singing from Clubberbont in the town. Our first video will be Ross Broadstock, Angie and the boys, and Tim Lewis at Rhiwsaeson Hillfort, the scene of the final battle in Keith Price's Saxon Marathon. And that's going to be followed by an interview with Rob Shaw. Over to you, Arnie, to kick us off. Well, that was a very nice one. He didn't give me the title of that one, but that was very nice and very well played. So keep them coming, Arnie. Thank you very much. So anybody from Canada who joins this evening, today, this morning in Canada, happy Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day in Canada. In the comments from the YouTube channel during the week, we had some very interesting points raised, ranging from congratulations to Arnie for the progress he is making, to talk about viruses and toxicity in the fallout of comets. Plenty of people make comments on the videos from the week before, and we do read them and do enjoy them. Sometimes we respond. So Peter WW said, Dr. Victor Klube, Dean of Astrophysics Department at Oxford University, in 1986 estimated that the comet of 562 had exploded with the force of 100,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. It might have been 100 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Back in 1986, and he's saying it's a comet of presumably the 6th century. Hopefully it was 562. Ivan Wynne Williams says, finally, English academia is being dragged screaming and kicking into the light of the truth, and confirmation of this comet was depicted in the Ravenna mosaics generations ago. Great video, keep them coming. And there's a bit of Welsh then. I'm learning, but this might be beyond my miniature skills. Aver chog heddwch I pawb. So that's definitely peace to the people, and peace to the people. Dave Watson says, recent research indicates that the world suffered a cooling event circa 536 AD. Thanks to advances in technology, they were able to analyse ice core samples from an alpine glacier at a resolution of months or better. The work involved multidisciplinary collaboration by British and American experts. Their findings have been widely published in the light of accelerating climate change. So we need to have a look at that research. Thank you very much, Dave. I think it's been mentioned elsewhere, possibly by yourself, maybe on Facebook. And 536 versus 562, if 536 is right, and that's two different sources of scientific research saying 536, and we can't explain it maybe by the differences in the various datings of calendar datings, then maybe we should check our dating sources. Paul O'Donoghue said, when I was alerted to this live stream, I was directed to Live Show 133. Yeah, that's probably my mistake, Paul. It's the way the small pictures left in there. Anyway, to add, after I watched 133, something I read years ago, an ancient civilization was uncovered. The structures levelled to almost ground level. Skeletons were discovered alongside the remains and inside. So why were the bodies not being moved? No attempt after the disaster. And that was long ago to move them. I also came by an article, if I can find it again, in India, remains of ancient civilization discovered, and in the remains, skeletons were discovered. Why were they not buried again? Perhaps the area was too dangerous to go. And were these two events linked to the comet? David Hoops. Well, there's some irony. Cardiff University supports Wilson and Blackett's work. Well, it was perhaps the physics department. Shh, don't tell the history department. A very funny day. So plenty of comments in the YouTube channel behind the videos, after the videos have been aired. Well worth reading and well worth responding to. I don't think we have anyone officially responding, but keep your comments coming. as individual BHH supporters will comment, and this leads to interesting debate. As promised, here's the first video from Bethan B. Parker, that's BWE, performing her own composition, There and Back. Thank you, B. That was a beautiful piece and played exceptionally well too. And if there was any vibration, it was the way I've recorded it. So the actual piece is beautiful. And a great job on the photographs, Dad. And Di Parker gave us the permission to use his daughter's B's work. Thank you, Di. Di's photographs take us from Pontypridd to Treforest. And Meg in the chat has just said that it looked familiar. She recognised some parts. The photographs take us from Pontypridd to Treforest and back alongside the River Taff, a journey similarly followed by the remains of the Saxon invasion army in circa 551 AD and Arthur II's forces, who were either leading or were pushing them towards Rhiwsaeson. According to our recent presentations by Keith Price, Bob Morgan and David Moseley. The photos show a different world now to then, but the landscape remains largely the same. There's the occasional quarry, and the motorways, of course, get in the way. Let's take a look at satellite maps of the area to find out exactly where Rhiwsaeson is. Where in the world is Rhiwsaeson? That little island by there, the one with Birmingham in the middle. We'll zoom in and we find Wales. Zoom in again. Keep zooming in. We just saw Pontypridd highlighted. It's near there. You can see Llantrisant highlighted. There's Llantwit Beddau, Llantrisant, Beddau, Pontypridd over here. This is a valley, flattish, and Rhiwsaeson is above crossing in that area there. Interesting name of a pub, Caesar's Arms. There's the hamlet of Rhiwsaeson, and up there is the Hillfort right under a field. There is the peak of it. So right under the view is the Rhiwsaeson Hillfort. And then just up by here, the bottom of Beddau, Miskin Marsh. That's connected with the capture of somebody who's ended up in Berkeley Castle and executed. And that there is where the tumps were, the Beddau graves. Now a playing field, but there's a couple of tumps in the edge by there, still remaining. Coed y Muster, that's the name of a hotel, but Coed y Muster is the wood of mystery, connected with St. Icted, and where they interred the body of Arthur II in the cave in the Coed of Muster. Let's come out a little bit. So Keith Price is saying that the Saxons landed here, fought a battle at Taibach here, was pushed up the British trackway, or led up the British trackway. Some may have come over here, then they went up this way, through these valleys, Crynant, Cummer. That's where Pencastle is, in that area. Baden's here. Heroine is there, so they've come up this way, Rhiwsaeson heads the valley over, there we are, Rhiwsaeson over this, you can see the route. Lloyd Coed is the Cynnon Valley down here. That's the Cynnon Valley. Past Mountain Ash, Abercynnon, bridge over the Cynnon. Staying on the west bank of the Cynnon, the west bank of the Taff, down to Pontypridd, up the flat valley here, actually it's out this way, down the bank of the Taff this way, Church Village, Tontaig, to X marks the spot. Right by there. Conversely, in the walking it's suggested that they came from Baden, which is up here, with Baden there, straight over the Vale to there. So which do you think is the most likely? Either battles way apart in time at Baden and then Rhiwsaeson, or the campaign that took you over, up and around, down and up. And here's the sort of area that we're talking in an old painting. I've forgotten who it's by. Now that location to me seems to be on what's known as the Graig Hill, and it's almost by where the Roman marching camp is located. And the bridge in the centre of the picture there, the painting, is the old bridge at Pontypridd, built in the 1700s, called the Beautiful Bridge. But you can imagine that picture conveying what the topography looked like in 500 AD. It's got to be very similar. To the left, where you can see valleys coming down, that would be over this way. I think that's probably up towards the Rhondda Valley. So from Rhiwsaeson you could have gone up a very big mountainous hill called the Rhiwsaeson and come down that valley. But to get up the Rhiwsaeson is incredibly hard going. Even with a car, the car struggles. And the whole of the Rhondda Valley was reputedly just filled with trees. So the Cynnon Valley maybe is a bit broader, would have been this one here, coming down from that direction. But instead of coming up this way, where the mountains, hills are very steep, they would have taken this route behind these hills here and gone the flat way. And here's the bridge that we just saw in the painting in Pontypridd, right by here, right in the centre. Pontypridd. Interestingly, up here at Glencoch, there's a reputed battle in the Roman period up there. Over to the right here, over this common, this is Sangenydd Eglwysillyn Common. This is where the wind farms are going, over in this top of them hills by here. So we're saying that the Saxons pushed or led down here from the Cynnon Valley, this side of the river, and they would have come all the way down over towards Tontaig. People may have heard the address in Tontaig where you get your Camerographics books from. Over here, if you have a look you see a place called Castelli, which means castles. That's the location of Tarandysant in Baya, in these woods here somewhere. And that's what Ross was euphemistically calling the Snake Temple. It's located there. So we're saying now that the Saxons were pushed or shoved on this flat route here. It's a nice walk, that is. And take a look at the video we've just had of the music there and back, where Di Parker is giving us lots of photographs from this walk from Pontypridd by the bridge down to Tree Forest and back again. So the photographs were taken in that area, and in the 500s the march of the soldiers, both armies, was this way, up Tonteg, across here, ending there. Now the interesting thing about the hill fort at Rhiwsaeson, and Ross mentions it in the video that he's done of the hill fort, he mentions chariots. Now I'm not sure about Arthur II in that era using chariots, but they did in the Roman era. And so well, there's a little bit more about the Roman era and that hill fort, because it's right above the River Clean, and you might have recalled that Caradog fought a Battle of Clean. So was it the same place? I've cut it short there. It's not a lot more, but we're short of time tonight because the interviews that we have are quite long. As you can probably tell, I've bought into the campaign theory as opposed to single battles, and I support the 50-mile marathon route to Rhiwsaeson. But there are alternative versions, and in the walking novel, Alan has Arthur being aged 15 and the Saxons coming across from over the River Severn by land. So there's quite a few rivers to cross, and Rhiwsaeson, as you saw from the satellite imagery, is the one side of Baden. So if Rhiwsaeson was the final battle, then the Battle of Baden must have taken place afterwards, a different battle. But we'll think about that another time. So next up is Ross at the hill fort. He's there with the family, Angie and the boys, and with Tim Lewis. This video is on the BHH YouTube channel, and there's also a couple of others, and Ross in this video is bringing the walking big black book to life.
Beginning of the 6th century, on the Welsh throne, based in southeast Wales, in Esloig, Glamorgan and Gwent, is seen as weak. King Meirig, the Pendragon, the Uther Pendragon, the High General of the British, has been wounded. His hip has made him lame. He's become so lame he no longer sees himself able to lead the armies. It's by his will and his personal charisma that the British Empire, of all the kingdoms, is held together. What can he do? He hands over to his 15-year-old son, Arthur. Arthur is to become the new Uther Pendragon, the High Commander of the British armies. He has to hold together these rival, bickering kings with their fierce tempers and pride and forge them into one army. It's considered impossible. The Saxons over in England get wind of this. They hear about the weakness and see this as their chance to deliver a fatal thrust right into the heart of the British Empire. And they gather all their tribes together into a massive army, rumoured to be 25,000 strong, to do a smash. This time, not a raid, not like a raid from previous generations. This was going to be a seek out and destroy mission right to the heart of the British Empire, right to the heart of South Wales, and destroy Arthur, the boy king, and his capital. The word gets out. They've even included British rulers that are still in what is now called England, in Lloegr. They're part of this alliance. Word reaches the British, and they have a whole winter, a whole 6 months to plan. And what planning they do? They get the armies together, they've decided the policy. The Saxon army comes driving across the Severn, they get opposed, the army builds up, they get ready for a battle, the Welsh back away again. Their cavalry army is more mobile. They just send a few hundred. They block the way, another battle forms, everything stops, and they back away. It's one of the earliest examples of a scorched earth policy. There is nothing for the Saxons, nothing to forage. They get hungrier and hungrier, more desperate. Every river crossing, the Wye has to be crossed. They come across here, and eventually they start getting towards the heartland of South Wales. They fight a mighty battle at Bethan. For 2-3 days, they're smashing away at this small British force at the top of the hill, where the cavalry have dismounted, and they're going to hold them off. They're throwing stones. It's a pre-prepared position. The boulders are throwing, the stones are throwing. The Saxons are getting harder and harder. It's a small position. They can't bring their numbers to bear. Eventually, the British are tiring. They are only a small holding force, and ammunition is running low. In the middle of the night, they decide we're going to have to break out. So just before dawn, when the Saxons are spiteful sleeping, the cavalry storms down the hill, smashes its way through, and leads the Saxons on another merry dance. They've now gone almost a week without being able to get any fresh food. Water's difficult. They're fighting battle after battle, being dragged mile after mile. They're exhausted, they're tired, they desperately need this final battle. They come through the hills, they arrive, and they finally realise, they think they've got the British army cornered. They think that's it. That's all Arthur's managed to raise, is this 800 or so cavalry. Little do they know that the main British army of another 5,000-6,000 infantry is hiding at the top of the hill, ready to form this defence on this massive hill fort, with rings and rings of fortifications all the way up. This is what the British have been doing for the last 6-7 months, preparing the position. And as the tired and desperate and hungry Saxons come around the corner, think they finally trapped the British army for this final battle where they can destroy the boy king and take the kingdom and make Saxon rule, they look up and they realise actually they've been trapped. This is the battle the Welsh army has been waiting for. They look before them, they see the hill fort, which you can only see part of from here. They realise they've got to get all the way up there, past layer after layer after layer of fortification, and when they get to the top, then they've got a fresh army to fight. This is when they start to realise this invasion was not going to go to plan, and Arthur does not want them to escape back to England. He wants to kill every last one of them. And we're in a place called Rhiwsaeson, which is the hill or the ridge of the Saxons, and this is where they were buried. And we're going to go up that hill fort, and you can see what the massive fortifications were the Saxons had to take on. So at the bottom of the hill, we just read that Alan Wilson account of the battle, and sure enough, here's the stream on the main thoroughfare up. And just pan round quickly. So that was seen to be the main way up onto the hill. I think that would have been the entrance way that the main arms were taken. But once you close the gates, it gets a bit more difficult. And if you think that's the hill, you haven't seen nothing yet, as they say. And here's the other side of the stream. Now passing underneath there. So the landmarks all fit. So to find this hill fort, it's marked on the maps, and you just follow the A473 bypass between Pontypridd and Llantrisant. There is a sign for Rhiwsaeson, and if you follow that road, there's only one road, and eventually you'll see it. There's various footpaths and cycling places. It's great for a bit of countryside and to get outside. And if you look for that path, just park up somewhere and make your way to the top. Bring your own provisions. It's completely unspoilt countryside and it's really wonderful. and good exercise as much as anything. Yes, it's a great day out for the family. Get some exercise, learn some history, and have a fun time. There's the boys, there's Tim, Angie, and soon as we'll be having more group trips soon with Britain's Hidden History. Hope you can join us for those. All I recommend is bring some stout shoes. There is some climbing involved, some scrambling up some of these ramparts, so you need to be fairly agile, and take your rubbish home with you.
Actually, you can actually imagine, look at this, you can imagine if you've got enemy troops trying to mount an assault up here, right? So they get up here and they're still funneled into a valley area.
It's like another layer on the fort, this bit.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It wouldn't just be an easy walk across, you'd be stuck here now, like a giant moat. The banks will be built up along here.
Yeah.
So there's another load of defenders that moved one further step up. So like my Minas Tirith type thing without the stones. You just fall back and up another level every time. And all the time the missiles are raining down on you. Stones, boulders, javelins, arrows. You probably haven't slept or eaten properly for days. And it's about this time of year, so the ground's not too bad. We had some rain here today, be able to push up. Fighting your whole way up. Shield over your head. Missiles raining down, raining down. Oh, it's quite steep actually. We'll probably see some more ramparts. Let's go look around so you can find traces. Here's another peak. And oh my goodness. There's another peak to go again. Telltale trees and big mound. That usually tells us something. Very suspicious along here. Okay, I'm here with Tim.
So we're standing here with...
There's the Garth, isn't it? Yeah.
We're just on the south side of... Where are we?
Rhiwsaeson.
Caira.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Carai. The fortifications, yes.
Just half a mile up the road from Rhiwsaeson, if that. And over to your...
Well, there's Rhiwsaeson there, isn't it? There's no distance.
Well, there's only... It's just the bottom of the road down there. We're looking at the western end of the Garth mountain to our east, which you can see there, and you can just see the one pimple, which is the western...
Oh, right, one of the mounds, yeah.
Westernmost mound on top of the Garth. And the main body of this camp sweeps round north of where we're standing now. And
what's he going to come through here, or where's the high point?
The high point is to your left. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. It's behind those trees on your left now. Just there, that's the high point up the top there. And this is a massive fortified enclosure of truly huge...
It is huge. I didn't realise we're actually...
the mountainside all the way round.
We're on it, aren't we? It's not where is it, we're on it.
Down to your left is particularly...
I'll just climb up here a bit.
Steep and challenging.
Yeah, so that's the kind of slope they're about to come up, and they describe it on in the walking. So presumably they've been down in that valley there, probably, isn't it? Or anywhere around. It's 360 degrees, isn't it?
It's 360.
Yeah, what a fabulous defensive spot. So even now, we're still not quite at the top. There's another layer to go. That's what they call this Carai, as in castellations or the fortress. You can see Tim there, up he goes, another level again. It's been soul destroying coming up here. And you have to remember the whole thing would have been ridges and ditches, lines of stakes, people chucking stones at you. And every time you think you've reached the top, there's another layer.
And these overgrown areas, what you're seeing is more examples of the ditches and walls, which you see easier from above, but it's defended all the way up. That's what you have to realise. More walls, more ditches.
Okay, so we're now about 2/3 of the way up. In the distance you can see a transmitter mast, which you think is a Hillary transmitter mast to get your bearings. Behind those hills is the Severn estuary, often referred to as the sea, but it's actually an estuary of the Severn. If you pan round, so it's not far from the Severn, you see, that's why it fits all the descriptions. Severn over there, and Cardiff a little bit round the corner. Like I said, that mound we could see earlier was Penarth, and in the distance, I'll try and zoom a little bit, you can see another headland. I hope you can possibly get a better view from the top, because it's only 3/4 of the way up. These hill forts. You know, if you can see a shadow in the background, that's another headland going across there. So you get an idea how close the sea is. Well, the Severn estuary anyway. It's massive. Go further up. Look at the views across there, all the way up the valley. And we'll have a look in a second when that ends up. Up we go. And up again, here we go again. And you can see another line of fortifications, which is sort of marking the summit, hopefully, as we get towards the top of the fortress. And you can see, again, another line of defences. Up we go again. Up we go again. It's only get my second win now. You find that with these walks. I find up the first hill, oh, I can hardly breathe. Legs are killing everything. Keep going, you'll be all right. Push up the second. It's hard to get your breath after an hour or so, or half an hour. Wow. And now here's the other side. So in case you think you'll sneak around the back and take the easy way up. Good grief. Yeah. Went to our Britain's hidden history. So hidden this is. Just get my bearings a second, but I was born basically and raised over there somewhere. And I've moved back and live over there somewhere still, or now again. After a gap of a couple of decades. I never knew this was here. And these new houses down here, let's get nearer and nearer to the hill. They don't realise probably, they got this out to the view from their bedroom window. So just to get your bearings a bit, up over the top of the hill, on the top now. Oh no, almost on the top, there's another layer I just saw. And there's the good old Garth again, our landmark. We've got the Orion star mounds as well. Wow. My new regular walk. So close to my home I never even realised. Is this the final hill up here, Tim?
Yeah.
This is the final bit. This will be the last chance. Last chance defence.
Penarth head over there.
Oh,
Just a little dip.
Oh, that's Penarth, is it?
I think so. Yeah.
So we got the River Severn down there.
Yep.
Which
And obviously you've got
the sea, as some people call it.
Clear communication, visual communication with the top of the Garth Mountain.
So that's what we're talking about with Penarth, with Fortress Glamorgan. Then we got Penarth,
Yeah.
which is the head of the Arth, or the head of the defences.
Yeah.
So we see a seaborne attack. The signal can go up. That can be seen then on the Garth, which is the main beacon point on the defences. And then you got the various hills then where you could mount your defence.
I was just going to say, the Garth Mountain over there is 1,003 or 1,008, maybe 1,000 foot, 300 metres. This is about 200 metres, maybe a touch below.
So that's almost 700 feet, isn't it?
Yeah. So what we've got here, though, is that the defensibility of this position it's much steeper all the way around. It's got this huge ditch and mound, triple ditch and mound structure around nearly all of it. There's still formidable obstacles at hundreds and hundreds of years after they were made. So this must have been a pretty epic fortress in its day.
Well, the point is that the highest ground's over there, but it's not as defendable, the Garth, is it?
Yeah.
This is, you can see, it's probably 1.5, well, at least 1,000 years since anyone probably bothered working on these defences. I don't know if they used in medieval times.
So the other thing is, we looked down at Mount Baden. One at Baden.
Yes, yes.
And you had that area down there where you've got basically almost plains all the way around it, and I mean that would be fantastic sort of defence area for harassing with your enemy with chariots and that sort of thing.
Just make their life miserable, really, isn't it?
And on we go upwards again. The deceptive thing about these hill forts as well is that the sort of false horizons, where you keep thinking you're nearing the top, and there's a defensive line, there's a wall or a ditch, you battle your way through it, and then you think, hey, we're at the top, then, oh, there's another climb. And it's a lot steeper than it looks on the video, I can tell you. And as you finally get to the top, and you realise what a fantastic defensive position you've got this great flat area where you can muster your troops, you can tether your horses, you can make the camp, you can stay up here for ages, and you've got the view all the way around. No one's going to sneak up on you from anywhere. You can sleep peacefully, you can enjoy your food. And again, there's another perimeter guard in this, as you can see with a line of trees there. It's another ditch going all the way around, which you'll see in a minute. It's even when you get this far, you still haven't broken into the fortress. It really is vast and quite remarkable. An example you call linear defences, where you keep falling back to another line of defence, and you've always got the high ground, you've always got the advantage. And as you can see all the way across. You can see the other signal beacons, you can follow progress. It's just the perfect defensive position.
In some records, this is actually called Arthur's Castle. And it ties in with the butts. Hope you can see. So the poor old Saxons, we spent days and days and days and days, or Wessex maybe, but the invaders certainly spent days and days and days up and down these hills, fighting various minor engagements, every river crossing, ambushed during the night, no chance to forage. And then they finally corner the Welsh army, and they look up and see this massive, massive hill fort with fortifications at the top. And unbeknownst to them, another couple of thousand men hidden. And there's one place, Tim's points out the armies could have been hidden. This whole top surface is a great size for encamping an army. And you've got this depression here, so like not exactly a valley, it's a low place. You have infantry ready to go, even cavalry, all saddled up, just waiting to pile out any direction across this hill. And just because shooting down these various wide walkways you've seen. You need them wide, because you want to use them for your cavalry and your chariots, you see. It's no good having all very narrow walkways for an army that's got a lot of cavalry and possibly even chariots in the earlier battles, Roman times. And who knows what they did later times. There's certainly cavalry. All the records talks about the heavy cavalry making their charges. So 400 or 500 cavalry fitting in, no problem, all ready to go. Pick your moment, pick your spot. You can walk around the battlements, see how it's going, and whoosh. There's some people to give you an idea of the scale of this. It's a perfect area to have as your, if you can imagine a camp, palisades, maybe even some buildings, tents. This would be your base. See over there, there's the Garth. What a spot, what a spot.
I was saying that some of this area, there's a flat steep area to the south there, and you don't actually need this triple ditch and mound system out there, because it is so steep that the enemy's got a real big problem getting up there anyway.
Just to show the other side, it's facing east, I guess. The ditch continues all the way around. Amazing, look how high up we are. Fantastic.
I think Ynys-Mardy, not the one right in front of you, the one on the horizon.
Yeah, that's Ynys-Mardy, the large hill over there.
Yeah.
And then we can see those thinking wind turbines. You realise when you get up on the hills, I say this often, I know, but So only when you're up on the hills, you have to get and walk, that this all comes to life. And you can really see how it works, because when you're down in the valleys on the roads, for a start, you forget how close you are to the sea, and the Severn's only just a few miles that way. You don't feel like you're near the coast. You don't feel like you're in a vast, almost wilderness of these great hills. And you can see here across, this forms the whole fortress, 360 degrees all the way around. I guess you have a final little hill there. And we found the fortifications. Yeah, Tim was a little bit too far from the mic to hear him clearly here. What he's demonstrating is how large these ditches are. And this is after at least 1,000 years, you know, of slowly filling up with the foliage dying and all that kind of stuff. And it's still, he's a good 8 feet below where I'm standing. And that's after having worked your way through 2-3 layers of defence already and up this huge mountain to get near the top. Or huge hill, not technically a mountain, but it feels like one. And again, you've got to come up, and you can see there's clear signs this is a proper manufactured ditch. It goes all the way around. There's no way that could be some sort of natural feature.
You got one.
Right, here we go, fortifications, yes.
Imagine how deep this would have been.
Yes, yes.
Okay. We've got a huge cliff here.
Yes. Hang on a second, let's have a proper look at this, look. This is what we're looking for. Hang on a sec, Tim. Ramparts, look at the size of this ditch.
So here, a massive double rampart.
Another double rampart, yeah.
Double ditch. If you come down this way, it turns into a triple one.
These are the kind of ditches. Must be a nightmare to get up. Tired, hungry. Battered all the way up. It's been a very depressing sight.
In fact, they had 2 ditches. Take here. In fact, you've got 3 mounds.
Yes, yes.
A mound here and a mound here.
And these what they got all the way around, probably. They've been levelled off, haven't they?
They're big ones, yeah?
These haven't bothered to level this off. Look at the size of that. Whew. That's the way it would work. We'd be standing up here on our rampart. Pointed stakes, blockades, all the way down here. There's a ditch down the bottom, probably something nasty in that. So any enemy, you've got to clamber up this long hill under missile fire the whole way. As you get near, you've got to climb over what would have been a bank there, down into the ditch. And as they're clambering up, we're stabbing down with our spears and throwing stones and generally making life miserable for them. And at some point, when the command decides if somehow, sheer weighted numbers, they manage to break their way up, that's the point then. You say, right, fall back 1 layer. And then you go back, and then you go up, and repeat the whole exercise again, the next layer up. And then amazingly, there's another layer to go. I've lost count, probably the 5th layer altogether. So you just imagine the difficulty of getting up there. What a fantastic fort, and it's 360 degrees. And to me it seems exactly like what is described in Arthur the Walking Book. Fantastic. And on the other side, we'll hopefully be able to see Money of Bethan, where they fought before they came here. Yes, look at the military side of this. You can imagine these, that's another, to give you an idea of the sheer scale of these. That's another line of ditches. And you need the wide area. See, that path is wide like a road. So if you've got cavalry or further back even chariots, you don't want a narrow track. You want to be able to go round and round. So what we're looking for now is tactically, Arnie just made a good point. How would you get down there? You wouldn't want to ride your horses down this steep bank, would you? So there's got to be an entrance somewhere to all this, and I'm guessing it's the way we came up. And There's got to be a shallower entrance, and that's basically the way we came up that way. I would think you have to take horses that way, Tim.
Okay. Yeah.
You pretty much have to go that way, the way we came in and out.
Yep.
So that's probably why it's got the extra big ditches and ramparts and extra, because that would have been the shallowest way in, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And presumably, if we carried on looking, there'd be another one, so you've got 2 ways out. So you can come around the back if the press gets a bit too steep, you know, it gets hard going here. That's fabulous. I've never heard anyone talk about this. I mean, it is on the maps. It's not another example of what we call Britain's hidden history, hidden in plain view, isn't it? I mean, it's not hidden at all, really. It's only hidden by the lack of publicity and knowledge about it, isn't it? And it's just worth it for the walk. You know, just come for the walk. It's fantastic. Where, isn't it?
I think we came up through here.
That's a possible track down, isn't it? You could ride down there, I reckon.
Narrow though. This is where we came up.
Yeah, we can't.
100 people.
Presumably, yeah. It's,
Daddy, you can
yes.
fit 2 if you
You see, I was talking about like the mounds with the stones in them, like filled with stones. Tons of
Oh, you're right. Yeah, this is some sort of wall here, Tim. Look.
Yep.
Good spot, Zav. Well done, Zavy, Leon. Yeah, this is some sort of wall here. And as usual, wherever there's a wall in Wales and there's a chance of some archaeology, they put trees in it. And as always, their roots will be wrecking it. Well, I come around the bottom of that and have a look. So there's definitely a proper wide path going all the way up to the top. And that's what we're just looking at up there. Looks like there's a stone wall there. I think maybe they had stone at the bottom and palisade at the top. But you can see a clear ridge of stone going all the way around there. What a tough place to get into. And that seems to be part of the fortress, with this being the giant ditch which you could ride through to either trap the enemy or use as a mobile defence. Or possibly a grave mound. It's pretty big. We need some archaeology around here or here. Quite tragic, really. Think of thousands and thousands hacked and chopped and pierced, bashed over the head with heavy things, trampled to death, executed. Must have been horrific. It's so peace and tranquil up here now. You know, I just saw a butterfly flicker past, there's birds. Beautiful countryside. But for a few days, at least once in history, this was a scene of dreadful carnage. Now, on the way down, here's definitely a candidate for a grave mound. See, you've got a stone on the top, and as usual, the trees planted on it. Classic burial mound. It's quite small, so that could well be a noble or something, someone trying to get to the top of the hill, or a defender. It's got a fantastic view. So there's the mound from the other side. Very interesting stone there. It kind of looks natural, but got the big breaks and everything. Looks like it's been put there or toppled over or something. I mean, possible it could have been a stone cairn at some point, a real monument for fallen warriors, something like that. Or it could just be a rock sticking up the ground. Be great to know, wouldn't it? So again, if you're going to be buried somewhere, it's not a bad spot. All the way down to the Severn and the invasion routes. Fantastic.
But this bit down here looks like it's part of a wall. And
Yep.
there's stone debris going around there.
Yeah.
And then over this side here, you again have got a wall. So this might have been an entranceway here.
Well, I think the wall goes all the way up.
And the wall goes all the way up, yeah.
Because that's what we were discussing, wasn't it? There's got to be a way of getting your army in and out.
Yeah.
So as you come back down the hill towards the bottom, I know, potential burial mounds around. But the story goes then, the now battered and beleaguered Saxon army, starving, beaten, exhausted, trying to flee, but they're not being allowed to return home They've been constantly pursued and harassed by cavalry and archers. And at some point, they must have stood and just said, right, this is where we're going to have to stand and die. And this area around here, this village, is a village of Rhiwsaeson, which is reported to refer to that event. You can hear the birds, very peaceful. Final resting place for the army, reputed to have started with 25,000 and hardly any returning home.
Thank you, Tim, for your expert knowledge displayed in the video, and of course thanks to Ross. A wonderful presentation, and Tim and Ross made more video content at Rhiwsaeson along with Rob Shaw, and Ross also read from the War King in another video, and these are all to be found in the playlists. So Ross described exactly where the Hillfort was, just off the A473, part of the new bypass, and it's where the old road was as well. And if you go round from the roundabout off the A473 towards the hamlet of Rhiwsaeson, you see a big tourist board on the right hand side, and that tourist board only describes that this pathway was part of the pilgrims' route from Penrhys to Llandaff Cathedral. Nothing whatsoever about any potential battle at that Hillfort. And as I said in the video that I did with the satellite imagery, the part that I haven't played tonight, I'm talking about the River Clean rising from Rhiwsaeson and just moving a couple of miles, hardly anything, down to Pontyclean from that spot, from that very same spot. Some of those brooks probably ran into and formed River Clean. Well, I say every week that everyone's welcome to contribute a video, and we're still asking for work urgently. So Angela or myself will act as liaison to publish them to the YouTube channel. But if you publish straight to Facebook, then let us know that you'd also like us to put your video on the YouTube group channel. And just message us by finding us on the BHH Facebook group page under members. So if you've got video content or a PowerPoint in your presentation, it's likely to get on the Sunday show. I'm reaching out to all our experts for interviews, and if you've got something to present to the group and I haven't made contact with you yet, why not get in touch with me to organise such an interview? So I've organised such an interview with Rob Shaw, and he's already contributed to the group content with interviews with Ross. Some of you may have seen the interviews about Rob's book, The Architecture of Power. So let's take a look at the video chat Rob and I had. I've condensed it better, about 10 minutes, and that's only because of time constraints today. But I'll post the whole video unedited to the YouTube channel during the week. Hello. Well, today I'm speaking with Rob Shaw. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, thanks, Paul. Thanks for asking me to come along.
My pleasure. And we're going to be talking quite a lot of different subjects today, partly based on your book, Architecture of Power, but we're going to go back much further in history. And first of all, I'd like to know a little bit about you, Rob. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Rob. I live in London, have done all my life. I'm essentially a teacher that helps people. I've taken some training in sort of neuroscience. So I help people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD overcome the symptoms of their conditions. And so I work with in schools where there are special educational needs. I've been doing that for 20 years now. The neuroscience stuff has come along relatively recently for me. And I've always been fascinated by history generally. And as I hit my 20s, I became fascinated specifically with the City of London, which is, the sort of dark heart of this city, the bit that no one really understands, the bit that governs itself, the bit that has its own police force. The City of London was the sort of engine behind the British Empire, and it still remains probably the richest and most influential organisation on earth, which is remarkable because very few people know anything about it. So in about 2005, I moved to Whitechapel, which is just on the edge of the city. And it really gave me an opportunity to walk the streets and just sort of geek out about it. And during that period, I got a job working at a school on Brick Lane.
Ah.
The school on Brick Lane was a Christian school full of Muslim kids. And I was kind of confused why there was this Church of England school in such an overwhelmingly Muslim area. As it turned out, the school was connected, like physically connected to one of Hawksmoor's churches, Christ Church, Spitalfield.
Oh, right.
And a lady who worked there, Jewish lady called Marge Hewitson, told me that during the war, she and her family hid in a set of tunnels that went between the school and the church.
Wow.
And actually, to give you some idea of how popular they thought the church was going to be, they built an escape tunnel for the priests just in case things got a bit riotous. So this escape tunnel linked the school with the church. And in a novel about Hawksmoor by a man called Peter Ackroyd, he talks about how under that church, Hawksmoor had built a labyrinth for kind of ritual satanic purposes. So that was obviously fiction, but the idea of going down the tunnel utterly fascinated me. And it was my reason for really kind of, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. I thought I was going to get to play it for real. And I just, Hawksmoor became a fascination. I started reading his letters, started reading, contemporary accounts of his work. And there are a lot of urban myths about Hawksmoor and what he got up to, some novels, some poems, an amazing graphic novel about Jack the Ripper called From Hell, mentions his churches. So my sort of background in teaching and education, I've always been curious. And moving to the East End, suddenly all this new information, this new geography was surrounding me, and I kind of became fascinated with Hawksmoor. And the book, the Architecture of Power book that Ross helped me put together, is kind of the culmination of that fascination with London history and the origins of the City of London, and some of the things that we don't get taught in school, you could say.
Yeah, and that's one of the only books that Ross has published that is not of the 1600 BC through to 900 AD era, isn't it?
Yeah, he was very kind. I mean, he had a plan, as I understand it. I mean, Moses in the hieroglyphs is orange, and he was going to go through the rainbow. He said, like, the earliest history books were going to be sort of red, think where Jesus is buried is green, and so my book, purple. And he was a wonderful man, and as you know, very, very interested in history and what we do and don't get told. And I just sort of agreed that by putting my book in, kind of gave access, because everyone knows the Fire of London, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And honestly, what I now know about the Fire of London, I still find hard to believe. But it's a very clear case. It's a very, very clear case of hidden history, of history being rewritten. Yeah. So in that sense, we agreed it was a great fit, as well as it being wonderful fun hanging out together and talking it all through.
Yeah. Well, maybe a lot of people have heard of the Great Fire of London, but maybe they haven't heard the truth of it.
Well, that's exactly it.
How did you meet Ross in the first place then? Yeah,
well, it was a wonderful coincidence. I had come across the ideas behind Wilson and Blackett's Moses in the Hieroglyph, and I was looking for a copy. I'm a reader. So looking around, it was like to get a second-hand copy was £800, £900, and I couldn't afford to be that curious. So I was going around on the internet, Googling and just sharing messages. Does anyone know where I could get a PDF or a copy of this book? And lo and behold, within about 2 minutes of me doing that on one particular forum, Ross got back to me and said, yeah, I've just published it today. Would you like a signed copy for 20 quid? And I was like, it was just amazing. It was like a Pandora's box had opened up of goodies. And so I got the book, and it's fascinating. I mean, as I'm sure you know, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
I'm going to say it's sort of a bit idiosyncratic in how it's put together, like a bit episodic and not particularly well organized. But Ross explained that what he was doing at the time was creating the Kimmeroglyphics book. And when I saw that, I sort of fell intellectually in love with him, because it's such a wonderful book, so open, so clear, and such a great, like you could show it to primary school kids and they'd get it, if you see what I mean. And,
so why did you want a copy of Moses then? You could have had mine if I could have got 800 quid for it. Yeah. Why did you want a copy?
Well, yeah, for me, what's been wonderful about the Britain's Hidden History thing is it's just sort of added or augmented stuff I've been curious about since my early teens. I was a massive fan of, obviously I'm a massive fan of Tolkien and the whole thing. I mean, I read The Hobbit when I was a kid, and when I was about 11, I picked up the Lord of the Rings, and I think when I was about 13, I finished it, and it just shaped my imagination. I mean, it's an amazing work. And then I read, the Silmarillion and all the other bits and bobs you can. And once I'd run out of the fiction, I started looking at Tolkien, what he said, in a more academic sense, you could say.
Yeah.
And I will reference and made a video called Tolkien and Welsh that goes into this. But he was very clear about Britain's linguistic history. I mean, he pointed out at lectures full of linguists who really knew their stuff, that when the Romans got here, the Romans were surprised how easy it was for them to understand British. There was a lot of crossover between these two languages, much more than the Romans had found between people who were living in France or Germany or Spain. For some reason, these two separate geographical entities have got a lot of crossover linguistically. Now, that obviously speaks, I'm sure everyone here knows about the Brute and all of that, the Brutus origin. But that was obviously very, very controversial in Tolkien's time. It's kind of taboo, but he kept talking about it. And it really fascinated me, this notion that there was this hidden history that he was kind of trying to get back. I mean, Tolkien and his circle were all vehemently anti-Norman. They thought
right.
The Normans got here, British culture suffered terribly. And, that's a fair summation. But the Moses and the Hieroglyphs, what it did, it seemed, was, if you like, Tolkien's works here, and there's just a massive crossover between the content. I mean,
right. Where was the crossover then?
Well, just the linguistics.
Right.
Like Tolkien didn't speak to the migration all the way back to Egypt, but he did talk about it, from essentially alluding to it from Troy across the Mediterranean up, and there was this language being spoken that was not, that's not well recognized today. I mean, he points out that, in about the year 500 AD, you could say, all of Britain was speaking the same language. And we weren't we're all British, And what Moses and the Hieroglyphs did to me felt like a link in a chain, or more detail in one area that had always fascinated me, because there isn't much out there that's credible, reliable, and solidly sourced that talks to this stuff. There's an awful lot of people who speculate.
Yeah.
But, I've always had a bit of a scientific mindset. I mean, it's nice to have something solid. And I figured Tolkien's analysis of language, I mean, who's going to argue with that?
That's right. Where did Tolkien then get his research papers from? Where did he find? What did he find to research to arrive at his ideas?
I mean, he was an artist with language. I mean, it's well known. He literally created Lord of the Rings as Middle Earth. There was a place to sort of frame his languages. He created languages left, right, and centre from a very young age. I mean, I know that he grew up in South Africa and moved to England when he was 8 or 9, and he records. You know, he was obviously he could speak and read English, but he'd see coal trucks and other things with Welsh on them, and he said he was just sort of drawn to the mystery of it all. And he speaks very, very beautifully about the poetry of the Welsh language. It was something that really resonated incredibly deeply with him, informed his sentence structure and the whole, whole frame of his work. So Tolkien's sources were really, I mean, he translated Gawain and the Green Knight, he translated Beowulf, he translated very ancient texts. I mean, his sources were by definition almost original sources of old language, and it was through those. I mean, his title was Professor of Anglo-Saxon, but that was the label that the professorship had, but that wasn't where his interest lay. He was interested in the Welsh, the British, and what had been lost as a consequence of the Norman conquest, and that was a big theme with him.
What did they do to, apart from killing people, what did they do to destroy the British records and Brythonic records? And I know they wiped out Yorkshire, didn't they? And Yorkshire was once.
Yeah, I mean, the operation to invade and conquer Britain was obviously very successful on the basis of quite how ruthless it was, and they did deliberately undermine British culture. I mean, there are several examples of once the Marcher Lords in the West started moving into Wales, they'd asked to look at people's libraries, they'd look around, and it does seem, even predating the Normans, there was a sort of Roman Christian attempt to undermine and denigrate the native British culture and, you could say, religion. I mean, I've become familiar with Pelagius, Pelagius, the British monk who, about the 4th century, went to Rome and said, you don't need to live in with original sin. We're all born in God's image. We're all, you don't need to ask for forgiveness from the church. Yeah. God made you this way. And there was clearly a very different ethos being spoken to or preached in Britain that didn't chime at all well with the Roman Catholic ethos and, religion. So when William the Conqueror invaded, he did have the Pope's blessing, and in some senses he did try and dress it up as a bit of a crusade. And in exchange for the Pope's blessing, when he got to England, he reintroduced a tax called Peter's Pence, which is where every man, woman, and child, as I understand it, in the country had to pay 1 penny for, and that penny, would all of that money would go to the Pope. So the Pope was financially compensated for his backing of the Norman conquest. So you could say initially they were very, very quick to make land grabs in the south and east. And as they did so, they make concerted efforts to not just kill or imprison or ruin the head of the family, but the local aristocracy, and undermine their ability to function. And so gradually there was a hostile takeover that culminated really with the Domesday Book, which was the first audit of an entire country. They went through valuing everything so they could work out exactly how much they could tax people and how much income they could derive. And I guess those are the more, those are very well established facts. I mean, they built 500 Motte and Bailey castles around the country in a period of about 20 years, all using forced labour. So the locals would have to build the Motte and Bailey that was going to subjugate them. There was a very concerted effort to break the will of the people and to break the hold, you could say, of this older British culture and introduce a more Latinate culture. So that, all these Motte and Bailey castles, the Domesday Book, all these things are very solid. There are other things that weren't so well recorded. Burning of libraries seems to be been a very common thing. So it's quite possible there were libraries full of Colbrin and other similar texts that the Normans were determined to destroy, and they kind of, I think Orwell said, if you want to, conquer a people, remove their sense of history and their sense of self, and then they don't know what they're fighting for anymore.
Yeah.
I have to say the Normans were incredibly efficient, and I'd say that was a big part of what they were about, which is why Tolkien, for example, and his circle of, medievalists never said a nice word. They were not fans of the Normans, quite the opposite.
Yeah. They probably burnt any early Saxon writing as well then.
Yes, just to completely cut the native culture off at the knees, stop people being able to understand what it is that they've lost. I mean, I feel very much like that today, or as a result of being exposed to Wilson and Blackett and hanging out with Ross, I suddenly see what it is that I was taken from me, which is my legitimate heritage as a Brit.
I know that in that Doomsday book, Birmingham had 9 people. Birmingham, three words, Saxon type words.
Right.
But no doubt a linguist would look into the meaning of words like that. So where did the Roman Church start to differ then from the British apostolic type church?
Well, from my point of view, there's this is something I learned as a result of my fascination with Hawksmoor. There was a contemporary of his, a man called Henry Aldrich, who made a translation of the histories of Josephus. Now, this was organised because at the time they were trying to establish a Protestant church on sort of scientific grounds. They wanted to differentiate from the Romans. So that this history of Josephus covers the time of when Jesus was supposed to be alive. It goes from about 100, you could say about 100 BC, 100 AD, a bit less than that, something in that area. So, and it was very, 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 very detailed, this history. Like if someone's dog died of a mysterious reason, it was in there. He didn't miss out anything. But actually, when Henry Aldrich did his translation from Greek, and took out all the old, let's say, extra bits of editing that have been in more modern versions of Josephus, so there's absolutely no mention of Jesus Christ of Nazareth whatsoever.
Well,
And this caused Hawksmoor and his sort of scientifically minded contemporaries a good deal of anguish, because Hawksmoor was being commissioned to build churches, and what Aldrich and that circle concluded was that there was never a historical Jesus. And in fact, very likely the figure of Jesus was a fiction created by the Emperor Vespasian for sort of political reasons. The first sort of churches and the first Christian symbolism all happened around Vespasian and his Flavian family. The new imperial family were the Flavians, and it seems they created the Roman version of Christianity as a way of teaching people to be more peaceful when there've been all these rebellions and revolts against Rome, encouraging people to be more pacific and to essentially use the Christian pacifist teaching to make the empire a bit easier to govern. And there's good history of the Flavians going over to other centres of the empire and saying, look, let's all adopt this religion, we can all cooperate, and it will help us run things.
So that's how it changed then from the British version.
The British version, I have to say, I know it existed. For example, Pelagius is an incredibly interesting figure, going to Rome and teaching the Romans about Christianity. So early British churches clearly exist. They're stone buildings. They clearly exist. What they taught, I would say the closest I've got to an understanding of that is looking at the work of Pelagius, and just this sort of sin-free. You didn't have to. You weren't born into sin. You weren't born broken. You didn't have to apologize for your existence and pay money and homage to the church and being terribly humble. God made you. Enjoy it. Work hard, be disciplined. And God will reward you. It was a very much a much kinder and freer mentality than this idea that the fact of your existence, the fact you're born, means you owe God an apology. And this sort of passive aggressive thing. God so loved the world that he sent his son down, and his son died for our sins. Now you owe God an apology. it's not a kind psychology. And
Yeah.
I say, whatever the British Church was teaching, it wasn't original sin,
Yeah.
if you like.
Yeah. And it's caused a lot of problems, hasn't it, down the line of 2,000 years? But,
Yeah. Well, even if that, even in 1066, there was clearly a Roman interest in
the
subjugating.
invasion, behind the invasion, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they certainly lent their shoulder to the wheel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think Alan Wilson, when he talks about it, the difference between Roman and British Apostolic, is that the Roman was heavily influenced by St. Paul, who may have come to Britain, who may have popped down the road from me at Llanillid. But St. Paul, I think Alan Wilson says that he may well have been an agent, double agent, secret agent, spy, you name it, or agent provocateur. Who would he have been an agent for then?
Would he have been?
If he was an agent, who would he have been working for?
The Flavians, absolutely. I mean, there's some really good work on this. I'm trying to remember the name. So there's a guy called Joseph Atwill, Atwill. His book, Caesar's Messiah, breaks this down very well. There's another book that covers much of the same ground called Creating Christ.
Yeah.
And it really was, like I say, architecturally, there are churches in Rome that are from the 1st century. So how do you explain those? And they were built by the Flavian family. A lot of the early sort of Christian iconography you can trace back to the Flavian family. And it's all very solid. It's very solidly evidenced. So the Caesar's Messiah hypothesis, basically, Vespasian was fighting to become, it was the year of 4 emperors, right? The Julian family had messed up the last time. Nero was dead. And so loads of people were fighting for who's going to be emperor next. And Vespasian at the time was in Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it. He went down to Egypt, and in Alexandria, they declared him pharaoh and emperor and, all of this kind of stuff. And it was there that he came across the god, I think it's Serapis, and the Ptolemaic family, who were the Greek family that ran Egypt, who created this god, who was a bit Egyptian and a bit Greek. He was Serapis, and it meant everyone had a god in common, and everyone loved Serapis. So when he was declared pharaoh and emperor, Vespasian performed a miracle, which was all traditional. He spat in a man's eyes and he became sighted, and he sort of trod on a man's leg and he stopped being lame. So there's a very ancient kind of ritual there that goes back an awful long way. But the creation, let's say, of Serapis by the Ptolemies was, a lot of people say, was his inspiration for then creating another unifying figure, this time Jesus of Nazareth, a pacifist, just after the Romans had probably their most bloody war yet to date, or rebellion certainly, which is the Jewish revolt of 64 to 67. In the aftermath of that, they were trying to find a way of bringing everyone back together by giving people a common religious practice that they could all share in. So as I understand it, the best evidenced and to me credible version of events is roughly that with some help and a lot of imagination, Vespasian and the Flavian family created Roman Christianity as a unifying religion.
And you say they were in Egypt as well at some point?
Well, yeah, Vespasian, was in Egypt when he was declared emperor and made pharaoh.
But could that explain then why there's this triumvirate of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, exactly like Horus, Isis, and Osiris?
Yeah, it's got to be something like that, hasn't it? I mean,
It sounds as if it could be the basis for it, yeah.
I mean, when you line up the careers of Horus and Jesus, there are so many parallels. For me, when I learned Horus had been born of a virgin birth on December 25th, you think, well, that can't be a coincidence. And you look at his career and some of the things that he was supposed to do. As I just mentioned, to become pharaoh, you had to perform these miracles of, making the blind see and the lame walk. And that's literally what Jesus does. These very ancient traditions, when you're being declared Pharaoh, you have to sort of prove somehow you're divine. I don't know if they got actors in, I don't know quite how they did it, but this was part of it. And then you find literally those same acts being, Jesus doing exactly those things. So when you look at the history of Isis and Osiris, and you can sort of see the story written down a long time before Jesus, was supposed to exist, it seems to me incredible that you want to say the two aren't connected.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a great deal of expertise and, I'm going to say, sort of investment in religion as a binding force. I mean, I learned from I saw Alan Wilson say, well, religio, I think it means literally like the ligaments that bind us together. What do we have in common? Religion is that thing that binds us together. So the Romans were not, as well as, when you were emperor, I think you were called Pontifex Maximus, and that meant chief bridge builder, and that you were the chief priest of Rome. So you could rewrite the rules, if you like, of religion as you saw fit, and it was a political thing. So I certainly find it very, very, very persuasive that was the origins of Roman Christianity. And if you're talking about being able to evidence it, the early writings, the early buildings, they all sort of emanate out of this Flavian family.
Right. But apparently, if you want to see the Egyptian Passion play, then all you have to do is go to Oberammergau when the Jesus Passion play is on.
Yeah.
And the same things, as apparently. Very, very similar. That's according to Arthur Findlay, the Scottish philosopher.
Yeah, I mean, there are elements of, the Jesus being born like Horus on December 25th when the sun's at its lowest, so John having his day on this June 24th when the sun's at its height. East, it's a solar story, and it obviously, it's sort of underpinning a solar myth, which obviously, as a story, as an idea, goes back further than you can fathom. And the Egyptians were certainly very, very, an incredibly elaborate and rich religious culture that I think it's evident that big elements of the New Testament story came from. Because obviously the Old Testament's a very different kettle of fish to the New Testament. I mean, the Old Testament God was a scary, lightning wielding, child sacrificing, walking or war god, and suddenly you had Jesus, who was teaching a message very similar to Buddha. And Buddha's message had got to Egypt probably a couple of 100 years before.
Yeah,
I think to a politician, teaching everyone to turn the other cheek and be polite and kind was obviously a very useful message to drum home every week.
Yeah. So does that explain also the persecutions of Christians in early Rome then, from 5100 to 300?
Yeah, I mean, there was, as Alan Wilson points out, some of the first crusades were into Christian. You were the wrong type of Christian. There was the Arian heresy. Who was Clovis, the king of the Franks, sort of converted to Roman Christianity, took the Roman money, got their help, and then had a crusade against his own people who were the wrong sort of Christians. So yeah, there was a lot of work done to make sure that the Roman Catholic or sort of authorized version was the only version that was allowed to survive.
Yeah. Well, if you were an emperor who was supporting pagan gods, if you like, country religion gods, then you would want to wipe out Vespasians, Flavians.
Yeah, I mean, the only emperor that I'm really aware of who really went to town on the Christians was Diocletian, and that was when there were 4 emperors, and he was one of them, and he didn't like the Christians. He wasn't a Flavian, and he did after he stopped reigning. A Flavian came in and kind of patched things up again. You can imagine that in the Roman world, there were a lot of people heavily invested in, the status quo as was, the old gods, the old infrastructure. I mean, being a priest, or these huge international infrastructures of these gods were all being asked to, down tools and pick up tools as, remake themselves, rebrand themselves as Christians. And you can well imagine that some people were very resistant to that. But actually, persecutions of the Christians is something that Christians maybe have overemphasized in proportion to what actually really happened. And it's might be, I mean, speculation, might have been a neat way for the Roman Catholic Church to kind of create a bit of distance between itself and the Roman Empire. But really, the one was the continuity of the other.
I think there's quite a few bodies recovered from the Colosseum or other places and placed in the catacombs underneath the Villa Britannia, which became St. Prudentia.
Yeah.
St. Prudenzia's church.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the current name is. I know they think that's one of the oldest churches in Rome, don't they? They've got mosaics on the walls from 400 AD.
Yeah.
But that would have been in the era of CADW. 50, 70 AD, maybe, something like that.
Now, you see, this bit this fascinating aspect of this, that the possibility of, once CADW, who uniquely wasn't executed. I mean, what was the name of the guy? Was it Vercingetorix was the leader in France? They brought him back to Rome in chains, paraded him about, and then executed him, because that's what they did. They humiliated you and then they executed you. As we all know, that didn't happen to CADW. And so it'd be lovely to think that was perhaps one way in which Christianity was introduced, but it had been a different kind of Christianity to the one that the more industrially minded Flavians were putting about. Like I say, I mean, it's interesting to speculate about this stuff. Why I'm an advocate or believe in the Flavian idea is because there's architecture and there's paperwork, and you can really see that they were building churches. I mean, using certain kinds of iconography that were Christian.
Yeah.
And they did that in the first century. So it's very hard to, I mean, it's rock solid. Like you say, when you see churches of ancient foundation, something real was happening.
Yeah.
There's sort of rules of evidence for me. You can speculate an awful lot, but you can get lost in speculation.
What do you think Alan Wilson and Barham Tony Blackett taught you then altogether?
I mean, for me, it was like veils falling. I mean, I've always been growing up in London. You realise that this is a place. This is an engine for making money. They don't care about individuals. I've always been fairly sceptical about the official narrative. Oh, Britain's a lovely place. We went and rescued the Indians from India. We stopped the poor Indians having to rule their own country. Wasn't that kind of us? We helped the Africans take all their gold and diamonds. Wasn't that? I've always been fairly sceptical. And what Wilson and Blackett did was just to really throw into sharp relief this stuff that Tolkien, I knew, was alluding to, this sort of lost culture, what the Normans did to us and the beginnings of empire and the sort of brutal expansion of the city of London all began, if you like, with the Norman invasion. So Wilson and Blackett, if you like, just fitted really well. I had my sort of rough idea of how Tolkien saw the world. And then with Moses and the hieroglyphs, they just added, I mean, Tolkien alluded to this language, and there they are showing you it in the hieroglyphs. And for me, I'm not entirely clear how much of it I believe, but there's such crossover that it's fascinating. And, hearing Alan Wilson talk about, Julius Caesar was so successful, he invaded Britain twice. Now, when I was a kid, I did read, the history of the war with the Franks by Julius Caesar. And, it was obviously propaganda. And he said, oh, yeah, I invaded one time and it was brilliant. And then I left and they gave me loads of money in hostages, but then I lost them in bad weather. So I went back again with twice as many men and it was brilliant. And they all loved me and they paid me money in hostages. And then I went back again and I lost them as well. And you suddenly realise that actually that's complete BS. Yeah. And you have to think about, well, who was it that was able to chase Julius Caesar twice off? It wasn't some naked guys, living in caves, painting themselves blue. There must have been something very sophisticated here in order to be able to do that, because you didn't really beat Julius Caesar. I mean, he was not an easy guy to beat. So you start looking at all this, and then the existence of Colburn, and the whole, the Llandaff Chronicles, all of this stuff. It still gets me incredibly excited because it's the facts that, if you like, that inspired Tolkien's fiction.
Yeah.
This is the real meat of it. So for me, Wilson and Blackett have helped me understand who I am and what I am. And I am a Brit that lives in England near the heart of a Norman Empire and a financial centre that started colonizing the world here. Our history was taken from us, our understanding of ourselves. We were just brutes running around bashing rocks together before the Romans came along and enslaved us. Thanks, Romans. And then they left. And then for a few hundred years, we were wandering around, probably all lost and not knowing what to do. And then the Normans came along and insurged us. Thanks, Normans. And that's our history as it's sort of, as we're taught it. We're a bunch of savages who needed someone to, tell us what to do. And actually, that's obviously taught to us now for political reasons. Yeah. And the real history is very different. Yeah. And I just sort of define myself now in relation to what Wilson and Blackett and Ross and the Britain's Hidden History group speak about. It's been incredibly liberating to finally feel like I'm home in some sense. I understand where I'm from. And also, I like to think why I've always had this sort of slightly allergic reaction to, the crowns and the banks and all of this kind of stuff that really England seems to specialise in.
Yeah. Even the BBC, I think I read one article, they said 80 to 90% of people on these islands share the same DNA, which is pre-Roman DNA.
Yeah, and then
there's a massive amount. We're more alike. We're more culturally the same. It's only the myths of Romans, Saxons, and Normans, and Angles, and people like that are splitting us apart.
Well, it's amazing, really. I mean, if you like, the ambition or the sort of the size of their imaginations, if you like, of these people who go, right, we can just rewrite history. We can organise this so everyone believes that they're naturally sort of serf material rather than citizen material. And a bunch of citizens getting together and chasing off Julius Caesar in 4,000 chariots. That's an exciting story. That's a story young boys would love to hear about and think, oh, wow, my ancestors were heroes. But no, they learned their ancestors were savages and they should be grateful the Romans came over at all, sort of thing.
Well, they still use the Vidi Vici Vici, or 100% sure the Latin. I came, I saw, I conquered, and even the senators back in Rome paraphrased that and said he came, he saw, and he ran away. Yeah, there's a lovely bit of Caesar bravely showed his back to the Britons who'd come to attack, or something like that, isn't there? Yeah. And again, but we have fed that I came, I saw, I conquered myth. There was Julius Caesar's propaganda.
Yeah.
So you mentioned churches and the architecture, and you mentioned architecture quite a few times, actually. Okay. And your book is called The Architecture of Power. So we sell that on Cymroglyphics because Ross and Angie published it. Yeah, I mean, it was.
Ross was an amazing guy, lovely guy, and really, we were talking more generally about Britain's hidden history, and I had by that point spent 10, 15 years really picking around. I mean, I'm a teacher. I have a full-time job, but in holidays and so on, you just read and read and read. And I mean, it was Ross's idea to call the book Architecture of Power. But really what it speaks to is the way that Hawksmoor was trained by Christopher Wren to take advantage of the opportunity that came after the Great Fire of London. Because suddenly all of London was burnt down, it had to be rebuilt, and the law now stated it had to be rebuilt in stone. So masons from all over Europe and all over the world came to London and started cutting stone, and that's really where modern Freemasonry got its start, in the Goose and Gridiron pub on June 24th, 1717. That 4 lodges got together and made the first Grand Lodge, and the first master of the Grand Lodge was Christopher Wren.
Right.
That's where modern Freemasonry takes its origins. I mean, there's some interesting history there, but really, again, architecture of power. What happened for me is I started working at a school on Brick Lane in the East End, and that school was connected via a tunnel to Hawksmoor's church. And once I realised that, I was fascinated and I just sort of was compelled to start diving in. So the churches Hawksmoor built were commissioned under what was called the 50 Churches Act of 1711. And the idea was, was to build 50 parish churches across London. He never got to do that. He built about 6, and even those were incredibly controversial. And he was a really divisive, controversial figure, Hawksmoor. And it just struck me as really weird that someone who was building churches could create so much hate and animosity, which he clearly did. And he also, in his letters, constantly spoke about people trying to get in his way, stop him doing his work. And it was incredibly tense. And I had no idea why that would be. But delving into it, you realise, as the only pupil of Sir Christopher Wren, he was very much under Wren's wing. And Christopher Wren was incredibly tight with the Stuart royal family. In fact, Christopher Wren's father, Christopher Wren Sr., had actually helped run the royalist side in the English Civil War. The old Order of the Garter was what Charles I used to organise, send messages, and basically the infrastructure for running the war. And Christopher Wren Sr. was secretary to the Order of the Garter. So they're basically the chief spy in England. So he's obviously very intelligent. You've got to say, you're not going to get a thickie as a spy chief, and incredibly invested in the Stuarts and Charles I, who had his head cut off.
Yeah.
So what sort of became clear is he had the civil war with the royalists and the parliamentarians. Now, the parliamentarians really got all their money from the City of London. So what you're really talking about is we don't like to talk about it this way, is the Crown vying with the City of London, the banks, for control. And obviously the Civil War happened. Charles I rode around like on horseback like a medieval knight with incredible sort of delusions of grandeur. He thought God would intervene. There's no way God would let the king get beaten. And all of that superstition did him absolutely no good in the face of the city, who were much more pragmatic. So the Civil War happened. As Charles I was executed, there was the 10 years of Cromwell. And for those 10 years, anyone who fought on the royalist side, that was an incredibly bad time, because you lost all your titles, your privileges, everything got all the major offices got reappointed to the parliamentarian side. Then Cromwell died, and Charles II came back just over 10 years since his dad had been executed. And him and his friends had spent 10 years in Europe plotting what they'd do to take revenge when they got back. And really, it's kind of like there was a hot war, and then when Charles II came back, there was a cold war. And a lot of different things happened. 2 sets of vested interests vying for the control of the country. Today we can call, looking back, we can call those vested interests Whigs, who were lawyers or bankers and invested in the city and wanted closer relations to Holland and that kind of trading empire. And then you got the Tories, who were kind of royalists and aristocrats and, the great and the good, if you like, who were very much very much close to the Stuart family, and wanted a closer relationship with Bourbon France under Louis XIV. So you had these 2 factions, and they were both very powerful and both wanted control of the country. So when Charles II came back, he was a very controversial figure. He was surrounded when he rode back into London with a massive armed guard, because no one was quite sure what kind of reception he'd get. And in his reign, very, 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 very strange things happened. I mean, the plague of 1665 is unique in the history of the plague, because it's the only one that can't be explained in modern terms. To give you a brief summary, plague comes in as a result of a boom and a bust in a rat population in the Middle East. The when the rats all die, the fleas jump onto humans, and epidemiologists who can trace different plague outbreaks across time, every single major plague outbreak that ever happened in Europe, they can plot and they can explain in this way, except the Great Plague of 1665. That has no explanation in terms of modern epidemiology. I know this because there are reports about it, and they say we can explain this one, this one, this one, this one, but not 1665. Not well known. Certainly, I didn't know it, but there was a way of buying immunity to plague, or at least buying a way out of getting plague, and that was nutmeg. Nutmeg was the world's most expensive commodity because if you eat some, no insect will bite you. And people realised for a long time that meant you didn't get plague. Now, in 1664, we attacked, I say we, the British under the Stuarts, attacked the Dutch merchant navy and stole all their nutmeg. The Dutch had a nutmeg monopoly at that time. So all of that got brought back to England, and Samuel Pepys, for example, got very excited because he was helping collect and collate all this treasure. And they talk about tons of nutmeg, and Samuel Pepys records that he made a fortune in 1665 trading in nutmeg. So,
do you think they, like Wuhan, maybe there's accusations about COVID? Do you think they are alluding to maybe the royalty then of Charles II actually causing the plague? Like,
I can't believe that I believe it, but I do, because there are so many coincidences that line up, specifically around the career of a man called Robert Hooke, who made a book called Micrographia. And he made a microscope and looked at different objects in close-up. I think that's crystals of urine, for example. Now he went through, and one of the things he did was he made an incredibly accurate and detailed picture of the flea. And this was published in 1665. In his diaries, it's clear he took nutmeg, and in his diaries, it's clear he'd been studying fleas for an awfully long time. So in 1665, the world's greatest expert in fleas was Robert Hooke, who was Christopher Wren's best mate and someone who hated the city of London. Later, after he died, Isaac Newton actually had Robert Hooke's portraits burnt and all his records in the Royal Society removed. And some people say they didn't like each other. I think that's a pretty major understatement. So Robert Hooke for a long time was written out of history. It's only relatively recently that people have started talking about him again. So what I know is in 1664 we stole loads of nutmeg. The world's greatest expert in fleas lived in London and hated the city of London. And in 1665 an unexplained plague happened in London and the population was decimated.
But the ones who survived were the ones who could buy the nutmeg.
Yes.
That's up the price of nutmeg.
Yes. Can you imagine the amount of money they made?
Yeah.
I mean, there's stories of people staying in London, like members of the aristocracy staying in London to sort of keep order while it was all going on. And as a kid, I thought, my God, those guys are incredibly brave. Why would you stick around during that time? Well, as it just turned out, they had nutmeg, so they could afford to be brave, if you like. And
sorry, I was going to say I read a fascinating book about the Spice Wars, and there was one Englishman who took on the Dutch single-handedly almost. He was rowing across the bay. He was one of the only people there. And he's a forerunner of the SOE or the SAS.
Yeah.
And he literally caused a change in the war, the Spice War. And as a result of the British winning that war, they acquired New Amsterdam, which was New York.
Yes.
Renamed New York.
Yeah.
And the Dutch actually got the island back or something like that.
Yeah.
Which
the peace treaty of 1667 between the English and the Dutch, the Dutch won the war, and they basically, we gave them their Spice Island back, but there was a bit of an interchange. And like you say, James Stuart, who became King James II, very modestly renamed New Amsterdam after himself as New York. He was the Duke of York, so it was the New York. And actually, when the war started, when the British started the Second Anglo-Dutch War, that was, I think, June 24, 1664, there were simultaneous naval attacks in America, Africa, and Asia. So it's quite an operation. And without warning and without provocation, the English attacked the Dutch, and within 3 years, the Dutch had bested the British Navy, and we had to sign a peace treaty and that is where we got New York from.
Right, interesting.
Yeah. So obviously you had this terrible year of 1665, maybe 100,000 people in London and the surrounding areas died. And then, in 1666, everything burnt down. So John Dryden, who was the poet laureate, Charles II's kind of versifier, called this the year of miracles. And it was just a series of judgments by God on London. And if you were of the medieval mindset, everything happened because God wanted it to. And so literally priests were saying, well, look, London's being decimated by plague. That's God's doing that. This is God's judgment on London. And what had London done? It cut off the king's head. So God was punishing London for cutting off the king's head. Then the fire happened. God is punishing London for cutting off the king's head. And this was quite literally, people were being told as they were dying of plague that it was their fault for siding with being on the wrong side of the Civil War.
Yeah.
So it was really quite an horrific time to be around.
Yeah. I've just been watching your video about the book. What about the initial documents that Parliament drew up, the reports on the Great Fire? And I think I heard in your video you say that you won't find those copies in Britain, and you're using an American university or library.
Naturally, when all of London burnt down, Parliament was like, oh, what happened? And they investigated. So they formed a committee, and I think on the 22nd of January 1667, they were ready to publish their findings. We'll talk about those in a minute. So I think that happened, and then before Parliament could debate their findings, Charles II prorogued Parliament. He closed it down, and after that happened, he broke up this committee. So this committee of 70-odd MPs had done all this investigation, interviewing, and going round, and had all this information, but suddenly they couldn't debate it in Parliament, and their committee was disbanded. So a few of them were like, well, that's not right. So they printed their findings. And this is the document that, when I first came across it, I just thought I was being pranked. Because so much of it is just completely 180 degrees, completely different to what we're taught in school, which was all an accident. In the parliamentary report, they named three really, really incredible bits of information. One is that on quite a regular basis, people who were committing arson had been caught. Quite often these were foreigners with incendiary devices found on their person, and they were taken by the city constables, like the city kind of neighbourhood watch, and then handed over to the royal authorities, where they disappeared. And there were, I'm going to say, at least a dozen instances in this report where they specify where and when and who caught an arsonist, who they were handed over to, and that they subsequently disappeared. And what they reference time and time again in this report is the Guard, or the King's Guard. Now, these were the King's personal protection force. They're the people who've been with him when he'd been in exile in Europe. They were his closest sort of brothers in arms. This is the King's Guard who escorted him when he rode into London as his protection force. They were all a sort of band of brothers who bonded in exile. Now, these people were going around rescuing arsonists from the police. And this was mentioned in the parliamentary report. Now, what possible explanation is there for, all right, the policeman's got an arsonist. Tell you what, I'll take him. Oh, don't worry about it. No, don't come with me. I'll look after him. And it disappeared. So you've got the King's Guard, and you can name some of these people who, for example, Abraham Cowley, who worked as a kind of a cipher, a coder for Charles II. He helped write and decode letters. Was also known as a poet, and he's known as the first person to ever write about cocaine in English. Wow. Abraham Cowley. There was Robert Holmes, who was a naval captain who started by himself, because they asked him to. Robert Holmes started both the Second and Third Anglo-Dutch Wars. He was very much a figure in the Navy. But there was a group of about 30 of these sort of figures who were the King's Guard, and they were the ones who were rescuing arsonists according to Parliament. So how do you explain that?
Yeah.
Second damning thing is what Lord Chief Justice Kelling, the Chief Justice at the time, was doing. If someone was brought to court during those few days accused of arson or whatever, he would dismiss the charges. He would get them kicked out, or he would tell the jury, you can't find these people guilty. So even if someone had wriggled, or some people were being processed in the legal system, the Lord Chief Justice was preventing that happening.
Yeah. And nobody knows about this now, apart from...
No, but it's all written. This is the thing. I remember when I first came across this report, it was online, University of Michigan's old English books series.
Yes.
Been stored there for ages. I have now actually seen a paper copy subsequent to writing the book. There's one held in a very dusty cupboard at the bottom of the museum with like padlocks in the Guildhall. They do have a copy, but they don't want you to know that they have a copy.
Well,
I have seen a paper copy, but this report was incredibly controversial. I mean, Charles II, literally, once it was published, had said it was illegal to own a copy and had the public handman confiscate and burn them, which is why they're very difficult to find in this country. But I'll just say the third and the most damning aspect of the report is just how much James, Duke of York, who later became James II, James Stuart, how much he was involved. His name comes up time and again where people are being rescued. The arsonists are being rescued. At one point, the crowd were like, "No, we're not giving him up." And the King's Guard came in, shot their guns in the air, started bashing. James II came in and rescued an arsonist.
And none of them were ever brought to trial. Then I take it.
No, they all disappeared. Some people, it's possible they all went to Quebec because quite a lot of them were French, and it might have been something along the lines of, if you do this job, we'll commute your sentence, give you a bit of cash, and you can go and live over there, or something like that.
Right.
But the parliamentary report, like I say, was incredibly controversial. The king had it burned, and then a few years later, Charles II, had Parliament disbanded because they just weren't doing what, the relationship between Parliament and Crown had just broken down. So famously in January 1679, he asked all the Parliament to come to Oxford, and then he put on all his best clothes and said, "Nah, I'm not proroguing you. You're done. I don't need you anymore. You're disbanded." So he actually disbanded Parliament.
Wow.
In a much more direct way than his father Charles I had. So that's January 1679, and him and his friends took it upon themselves 13 years later to republish the report, but in a completely different version where it takes out all this different information, and it's all an accident. The fire was just an accident. So why would he 12, 13 years later reprint this report if it had all been nonsense in the first place? What was so important to him about retelling this story? Anyway, that was published and disseminated, and then after the Glorious Revolution, when James II was kicked off the throne by William of Orange in 1689, the parliamentary side republished kind of the original report. So 20 odd years later, this report was, published and republished because it was such an important document, because it laid out the fact that arson had been committed. So it's an incredible find. And literally when I first came across it, I just thought I was being pranked because all the stuff in it was just unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't understand why the king's brother would be involved in the Great Fire London. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So who is your readership then, Rob? Who are your readers? Who would you like to read the book? Every child in Britain, no doubt.
That'd be great for the mortgage. I mean, for me, it's such an amazing, outstanding. I mean, I'm a history skeptic. There are things that we get taught, even in our own lifetimes, that just clearly didn't happen in the way that, the media portray them. So it kind of fell into a broader picture for me of Britain's hidden history. But for me, anyone who's curious, anyone who wants to know and see a really solid example of history being rewritten, because it was rewritten. This episode was incredibly controversial between the Whigs and the Tories, right? These two parties battled it out until 1834, when they joined and became the Conservative Party. Then they started editing. For example, I could show you, where is it? This book. Gilbert Burnet, Bishop of Salisbury, History of My Own Time. Now, if you read this today, it's been edited to remove all the references to the Great Fire, because this is printed in 1970, this version.
Right.
You go online and look at a version of his book, History of My Own Time, before 1830, and it is incredible the amount of detail he goes into. He points out a man called John Graunt turned off the water supply to London the night before the fire happened.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a reservoir in Islington, which is where London got its pressurised water from. This man, John Graunt, brazenly went in there, turned off the water, kind of chained it all together and walked away with the keys. No one had ever done that before. And it meant on the night of the fire, there was no pressure, there was virtually no water available, which obviously helped the spread of the fire. Gilbert Burnet mentions that. So it's clear that people knew this stuff and it was deliberately edited out of history.
Answered, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say again, because it does seem to me a point worth reiterating, that the Whigs and the Tories, they've sort of fought in the Civil War, you know, members of each other's families have been killed, and people remembered this over the generations. They hated each other. But really, in 1834, they had to get together because otherwise the poor were going to get the vote. And they kind of came together and buried a whole load of hatchets, all their gripes from history, all the things that they hated each other for. They had to find ways of getting over so they could get on. And at that point, like I say, our history was unequivocally rewritten to edit out the fact that the Great Fire was arson and had been viewed as arson by the Whigs for hundreds of years. For example, on the monument, there was a phrase, something like the fire had been started due to a popish frenzy. Okay, they blamed the fire, or rather, Sir Patience Ward, the Lord Mayor of London, had it inscribed on the monument that it was the Catholics that did it, right? And then in 1830 something or other, someone came along and chipped that off to get rid of that accusation that the Catholics had done it. It was now all an accident. So if you've got any interest in history and how history gets written by the winners, I'd hope you find the book interesting, at least, because I try and set out what Hawksmoor was doing in his own terms, you know, referencing the Christianity and all these different influences that came into it, building his church. But it really, for me, it was utter revelation that the history I'd been taught as a child was a fabrication purely to paper over the cracks in the British establishment. So if any of that sounds like something that might interest you, please, I'd love you to buy the book for obviously selfish reasons, and also just because I can't believe I can't believe life has given me the opportunity to have this story to tell.
Yeah, amazing.
The indictment of our culture that there are such huge lies out
there. Yeah. At the moment, you've got at least 3 videos. Are they on the Britain's Hidden History YouTube channel, or are they on your own channel?
Well, no, they're sort of spread around. I'm afraid I'm not very organised, but the videos I linked to you about the book. One is called True and Faithful, and it is just an analysis of every page of the parliamentary report. I go on about who was on the committee, what their allegiances were, or what they found in some detail. That's about half an hour video, and yeah, you know, if you want to find out about this report, there's a link there in the video, or at the bottom of the video in the description, so you can actually go to the website of the University of Michigan where these different versions of the report are stored. And that's a fairly narrow focused video. I also made with a friend called Tim a video called The Year of Miracles, where I just sort of break down everything that happened between 1665 and 1666. And I mean, it's just the sort of compound unlikelihood of all these things happening by accident is just astronomical. There's no way all these, I like to talk about ducks simultaneously lining up in a line, you know, all of these things happened. And if they were all an accident, then it was God that did it, because there's just no other explanation. Or it was people. And people are
totally capable, aren't they?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Rob.
Absolute pleasure.
I know we're going to speak again because there's more books in the pipeline.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed our chat today, and it's been highly illuminating.
Thank you.
And I'm sure everyone who views the interview will gain something from it.
Well, it's really kind of you. Thank you, Paul. If you
And there we have it. And there we have it. What a wonderful interview, wasn't it? Thank you, Rob. Well, I learned a great deal from our chat together, as I'm sure we all did. There were some controversial subjects handled in there, and some areas which Rob has treated in more detail mentioned in the interview. There's 3 videos, one about Tolkien and Welsh, another one called True and Faithful Parliamentary Report Analysis, and then Year of Miracles. They can all be found on YouTube, and I'll put the links up in writing on the when I put the full interview out. So don't forget Rob's book, The Architecture of Power, available from www.cymrographics.com, unless you're in Canada, according to Susanna. Let's take a look at today's chat. I'm going to have to run through it very quickly now because I messed up the time again, didn't I? David Church pointed out the discrepancy of counting AD. It's about 30 years out. Derek Moores said that he's noticed mainstream starting to come round to the no Celts idea. Marshall Abrahams thought Dye's photos were very atmospheric and agreed with Derek that the truth is seeping out. Marshall queried Cardiff University supporting Wilson and Blackett. Well, that was in the tree ring work that they did. They basically didn't say they supported Wilson and Blackett. They just said it must have been a comet in the 6th century. Meg made the usual joke about Lantrescent being the hole with the mint. And it's a fabulous story by Alan Wilson about how Lord Tonypandy and James Callaghan stitched up Parliament. Probably stitched them up as well as Charles II and his brother. Rob Shaw talked about the War King. Saxons came across 7. Derek Moores added the comments on the Celts. He added to the comments on the Celts. Legolas Greenleaf says Rhiwsaeson is definitely connected with the later Arthur III Arthvile. He wasn't sure that Alan ever mentioned that the 6th century Baden battle ended up there. So we need a presentation on that then, Legolas. Rob Shaw talked about 518 for Arthur's first battle according to the War King. Paul Jenkinson said that chariots were in Europe much earlier. Suzanne Price asked, where is the heartland of South Wales? And the answer was given by David Church, saying, well, it depends on who you ask and when you're asking about it. Because to some people, the Vale of Glamorgan is the heartland, others it's the hillsides and the valleys. King Cole, maybe that's the heartland. And if you're from Cardiff, it's Cardiff. Marshall Abraham says she'll be back with some videos when her book is finally published, and she's still working on the index, two-thirds of the way through. Derek Morse, we all agree with Derek. Ross's enthusiasm is electrifying. Legolas said that he has just remembered the War King book was written before Alan identified Baden in his 1986 Arturius Rex Discovered. And so in the War King book, he put Baden in Gwent. So in War King, coming over from Gloucester in the east, you would fight at Baden first if it was in Gwent, and then Rhiwsaeson afterwards. In 1986, Arturius Rex Discovered, if he's fought Baden first and it's over in the west, then they must have come in from the west, fight Baden to end up at Rhiwsaeson. We're always updating facts with research, aren't we? Rich DJ asked, where is it called Arthur's Castle? Rhiwsaeson as Arthur's Castle. Good question. There was a massive discussion on LiDAR and Arnie's drone footage. Marshall said that the wider at Gog Magog is simply not there, and wonders why. A little bit of humour around that one. Paul Jenkinson says that my IT skills are slick today. Yeah, I even fixed my printer. Marshall says that she proofread Rob Shaw's book. Chris Newberry recommended Ralph Ellis's books. Marshall commented that the original Druid Trinity was Beli, Taran and Yesi. Chris Newberry added Freya, Lydia and Finder. Seems to be a very popular thing, a Trinity. Greg Griff says that people of the British Isles in 2004 said that Anglo-Saxon DNA made up to 10 to 40% of the DNA of Englishmen. And that was in a comment contradicting what the BBC said that I said. Interesting. There's much more discussion in the chat room on Rob Shaw's presentation, and rightly so. It's far too much for me to write down, and we've overrun. Chris pointed out something that I found was interesting. He said the YouTube algorithm removes comments. I'm wondering why. I only get to see just a few comments, and I'm thinking, is that all the comments? Until Rob Shaw's presentation came on, and then everybody went mad. But no, they didn't go mad. They multiplied the value of interest. So we'll now play the last piece of music, which I promised at the start, which is Bethan Parker, and she's singing in Clubberbont in Ponty. Clubberbont is because Ponty changes to Bont because of the grammar. So Clubberbont is right next to the river and regularly gets flooded. I highly recommend the place. I asked for a pint of beer in there in English. No, they ignored me. So then I asked for a pint of beer in Russian, and I got my pint of beer. If you ask for it in Welsh, of course, you're guaranteed your pint. So here we are with B singing I See Fire, recorded in Clubberbont.
Oh, Miss Oh, misty eye of the mountain below, keep careful watch of my brother's souls, and should the sky be filled with fire and smoke, keep watching over during sun. If this is trailing fire, we should all burn together. Watch the flames climb high into the night, calling out, Father, oh, stand by and we will watch the flames burn open on the mountainside. And if we should die tonight, then we should all die together. Raise a glass of wine for the last time, calling out, Father, oh, prepare as we will watch the flames burn open on the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky. No, I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire should my people fall, then surely I'll do the same. Confined in mountain holes, we got too close to the flame. Calling out, Father, hold fast and we will watch the flames burn open on the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky. No, I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire burning the trees. I see fire hollowing souls. I see fire blood in the breeze. And I hope that you remember me. And if the night returns, or if the dark returns, then my brothers will die. And as the skies fall down and crash into a lonely town, and with that shadow upon the ground, I hear my people screaming out. And I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire burning the trees. And I see fire hollowing souls. And I see fire blood in the breeze. And I see fire. Oh, you know I saw the city burn. And I see fire. Feel the heat upon my skin. Yeah. And I see fire. And I see fire burn open on the mountainside.
Well, I messed up the editing there, didn't I? Well, that's it for today, and it's been a very long one. I don't know if I needed to put so much in, but I got carried away. Thank you very much for your comments. It really does make a difference to the team. I'm not on my own doing this. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed our time together. I know I did. Thank you to Angela and the boys, and to all the volunteers working behind the scenes on both the group media platforms. So it's auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, ciao, nostar, tschüss, and see you next time. And remember, seek and you will find.
Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it informative. Britain's Hidden History Group has so much more going on our YouTube channel. The one you're watching now, there's a live stream, 8 o'clock UK time every Sunday. We speak to people like Wilson and Blackett, reprint their old books and help produce new ones. We go researching to the tops of mountains all the way down to the bottoms of caves. Busily recording the books, you can listen to them as well, and looking at mysteries and working out what we're not being taught in schools and preserving it, because the physical and written evidence is rapidly disappearing. You can also find out how to read ancient writing and hieroglyphs using the Welsh language. It's amazing. There's a Facebook group where this is being discussed. Along with a website, you can buy the books and help us. Also, as you can see, there's now a Patreon page where just a few pounds a month will make all the difference in trying to keep the project going and preserve this history for future generations, and also to find out for ourselves what is going on, what is Britain's hidden history. So until the next time, Heddiw!